Hello, it's Maggie, the Cheshire Crafter here. I've finished 5 baby quilts for Project Linus. Now, if you saw the video I made about making quilts for charity when I went to the Festival of Quilts, you'll be aware that they accept quilts made from cotton and polycotton, and they give specific sizes. The last 2 of the quilts I'm going to show you used fabric that I purchased at the stand Project Linus at the Festival of Quilts, and the toppers, 2 of the toppers, I was able to make for 75p, and I promised them that I would convert those scraps of fabric that had been donated to them back into quilts for them. The green pillowcase, once unpicked, is one continuous piece of fabric, and it's 25 inches by 76 inches. So it works out at 50p per fat quarter. And in the Oxford pillowcase, the beige one, there is a contrast of navy and beige on the reverse. So I have a piece that's 24 by 36, which is I'm going to use for the back of a cot quilt, and then 2 pieces of the navy blue, 24 by 34, and 1 piece 11 by 24. For my first quilt, I'm going to save the backing of the pillowcase for the backing of the quilt. My quilt is going to be 24 by 30. Then I have yardage and recycled fabric. This is all 100% cotton that was formerly men's shirts. You can test your fabrics and contrast by turning into grayscale. I've cut my fabrics into 2.5-inch jelly roll equivalent strips, and then I've cut my contrast fabric into 2.5-inch squares. Now I'm going to be using my Singer 99K vintage machine for that, and in order to sew these together I'm using up some vintage cottons. I have the same cotton in the top and in the bobbin, and my stitch length on this machine is approximately a size 2. My jelly roll strips are then cut at varying sizes. I'm going to start sewing the pieces of fabric right sides together and sew across the short end, and I'm going to use my 1/4-inch seam guide for this. To speed it up, you can chain piece a number of pieces together and then keep adding them to each other. I'm just going to keep on adding pieces to the end until I've got a long strip. I finger press as I go, and I'm subcut those strips into 10.5-inch pieces. To each of the 10.5-inch pieces I'm going to add a 2.5-inch square in my contrast fabric. Lay out the quilt in a random pattern and then even it out so that you've got an equal value. I'm now going to iron the strips, with alternate strips being ironed with the seams downwards and the other strips being ironed with the seams going upwards. That'll help the seams nest. Then stitch them together. Now for some variety I used different colours, taking the background fabric as a focused fabric, and it gave 3 different looks. For my next quilt I've cut 2.5-inch squares, 12 of each, green, dark pink and lighter pink. And please note that on each of these I'm using a directional print. You might find it easier to chain piece these. Separate and then finger press them open. Once you've sewn those seams together, iron, and you can now attach your wadding and your background. The wadding I have is a polyester, and the backing is the matching contrast pillowcase on the reverse. pin it with bent pins. This one matches the pillowcase that I have on behind. Let me show you an easy way to quilt when you're short of background fabric or wadding. Now for this I have a pillowcase exactly the size that I have my topper, and this is the size that I want my finished quilt to be. I've placed the two pieces of fabric, the background and the patchwork, right sides together, and then I've cut a larger piece of wadding for the back, and that extends outside all the way around. I'm going to pin together and then take to the machine. My Singer sewing machine, and I need to load up some bobbins with thread. I'm going to use the same thread for the top and in the bobbin. This is a Silco mercerized thread, 36 weight, and this colour is called Oatmeal. It's 367. I have my walking foot in place, a size 90/14 needle. My tension is set on 4. My needle position is to the right. My tension is on 5. Sorry, my width is 5.5 and my stitch length is 3. Extension table really helps because you need this flat. So I have my wadding, my topper and my backing, and it's the backing that I need uppermost because that's the fabric that I'm shortest on. And instead of 1/4 inch seams here, I'm going to allow a generous 1/2 inch. I'll start with a back stitch and go all the way round, but I'm leaving an opening at the bottom so I can turn it inside out. Right, let's begin. Now check all around that you've caught the fabric from the topper on the inside, and we're going to cut off some of that excess fabric. Cut 1/2 inch away from your stitch line and square up your corners. Trim the corner at a 45-degree angle. Remove all the pins, and I'm now going to turn it inside out. I want the wadding and the topper together, and I'm going to put my hand between the topper and the backing. Pull, making sure that I get right into the corners. Front, and because I've got 1/2 inch, if I sew a 1/4 inch away from the edge, it'll secure that fabric in place. And it'll also sew up the gap where I've turned the fabric inside out. So this time I'm using the inside edge of my walking foot as my guide. Quilt it, I'm just going to accentuate around each of the feature implied flowers. For very thick wadding, I've done 2 things. I've increased my stitch length to 3.25, and I've made the stitch line further apart. This means that it allows the fabric to bunch up slightly. That's okay with this type of quilt. This one is freestyle. I drew a circle with a heat erasable pen, and I'm just doing straight lines out from that. So I'm using the fabric that I got at the Festival of Quilts. I got this from the Project Linus for 50p, and it's got everything from 2-inch strips to 6.5 inch wide strips. I'm going to use this to make my own fabric patchwork squares. This formerly was a valance, A single valance had been £16 at Dunelm. I've cut from the frill at the bottom and there's still lots of fabric left in there. I've cut this piece from Project Linus cost £1. I've cut 10 7¼ inch squares and I still have loads of that fabric left. To make half square triangles, I'm marking a pencil mark straight across the diagonal on all 10 squares. Place the squares right sides together. Make sure that you've got fabric all around the edge visible. And where I've done long pieces of fabric, I've made sure that the diagonal will cut them in half. Now I'm going to sew 1/4 inch either side of that line and then cut straight down the pencil line. Once pressed, cut them down to a 6½ inch square. I'm using the diagonal line to lay on the seam line to make sure I've got a perfect square. To approach quilting this is to sew on the diagonal. I'm sewing just on the inside of the half square triangle, a single straight line. This patchwork now measures 22 by 28. So to make it to the size that Project Linus like, I'm going to add a border, 2-inch border all the way around. Quilting this one with the easy method where I'm sewing the fabrics right sides together with the wadding on the outside. Quilt this one, I'm doing it by hand. I'm on my lap tray so I can feel when it hits the surface beneath me. I'm using small stitches with the same colour thread, just a double strand of cotton thread, and I'm marking with a ruler and the end of a crochet needle, and I've got a light beside me, so it's a non-permanent mark, and because it creates a shadow it will guide me across in a straight line. What hand quilting does is draws attention to the fabrics because people look closely, and some of these fabrics are fabulous, aren't they?